Finance Minister eNCA will deliver his 2023 budget speech today. The energy crisis is sure to top the agenda as the country finds itself in the midst of stage 6 blackouts. But the amount of money he can hand out is limited as tax revenue is set to drop. Now, last year, Godongwane announced a tightening on bailouts for state-owned entities. eNCA's Rofhiwa Madzena is outside Parliament looking ahead to the speech and joins us yet again. Rofhiwa, what are others expecting this morning?
Mfundo, you're breaking up a little bit. I don't know if you can hear me this hour, but yes, we are coming to you from a sunny Cape Town, covering one of the most important speeches that will be delivered by Minister eNCA, and we've lamented various issues for various years, but it's time to see action. And that's basically what Deon George, who is the Shadow Finance Minister for the DA, said in his budget speech when it was delivered a short while ago. A very good morning to you, Deon. Thank you, as always, for joining us. And that's basically what you focused on, in that we need urgent reform to unlock the economy's potential. And you spoke about there being great barriers that are still in place that are preventing job creation and economic growth.
Yes, well, the big problem we have in our economy is it's not growing, and in fact we are likely to have a recession this year, especially if we get grey listed on Friday. So we are in a very, very difficult position, but there is enormous potential upside to our economy, and we need to pick the right policies, and government has not picked the right policies. For example, the labour regime that doesn't work. It makes sure that people can't get into jobs because people don't want to employ employees because they think that it's too difficult to do that. The red tape that business needs to navigate all the time, that's problematic. And also, we are working with a model that's failed. Fundamental problem in our economy is that government sees itself in the center of our economy. Now, if you put a dysfunctional government at the center of our economy, trying to do things which is not able to do, like provide electricity, you just got a recipe that doesn't work. Also, the failed model for black economic empowerment has made a few people rich and left everybody else behind. The DA has an alternative model for that, but that's actually based on poverty being a proxy for poverty, not race being a proxy for poverty. So we've said all of these things, but now we need action. So what we do want the minister to do today is to tell us what he's going to be doing to get the domestic economy going. So he needs to incentivize people to save. He needs to make it easier, provide tax incentives to save, and also needs to attract foreign capital. And he can do that by scrapping exchange controls. There's hardly any left. It's very easy to do that. So we want to see him doing that. And of course, crucially, we have no electricity. We are blackouts all the time, businesses battling, and so are households. So what we want the minister to tell us today is, what is the plan? Yes, we know there's a bill that's coming today it's Eskom debt relief bill that he's going to put on the table to transfer debt from Eskom to the national balance sheet. Now, we don't support that because there's no comprehensive plan. We may well support something if it was part of a comprehensive package to save the energy crisis in South Africa, to fix it, because what you need to do is unbundle Eskom, and you need to inject private sector into Eskom. What you need to do is you need to get independent power producers, and there's plenty of money available to do that, but government regulation prohibits that. And what is going to be happening anyway is that business and individuals are going to go on their own anyway, because if you're forced to rely on a dysfunctional government, you're going to break the rules and just go ahead anyway, and that is what's going to happen. So we're going to have a privatized energy sector in South Africa because government just failed. So it must get out of the way and be part of the solution, not be an impediment. Also, crucially, the cost of living crisis just carries on unabated. The Reserve Bank does what it has to do because it's independent, but it is the job of government to respond with sensible fiscal policy. Because if you do that, you can make food less expensive in South Africa. So, for example, if the fuel levy was scrapped, it's very much doable. It would make the price of petrol cheaper, and it would make transport less expensive, and then people will be able to move around, and crucially, food transportation will become less, and therefore the price of food, the knock-on price of food will come down. Also, the DA has proposed the removal of VAT on an expanded basket of foodstuff, because 80% of households are battling to put enough food on their table. And that's a crisis in itself, never mind the fact the electricity is off. So we have proposed that, for example, chicken, beef, tinned beans, soup powder, wheat flour, tea, coffee, margarine, peanut butter, baby food, that should be zero rated, and it is very much doable. But government has no will to act, and that's our appeal to the minister. Hear the problems, see them, and do something about it. In fact, what I've said before is just do one thing. Just start with one thing that's the right direction, because the sentiment internationally for South Africa is bad. Also, local sentiment is bad. If we are grey-listed on Friday, which is likely by the Financial Action Task Force, it means that compliance in South Africa is going to become more difficult. The knock-on effect to consumers is going to be worse. So what means that every South African is going to pay more for banking and possibly insurance. Yeah. That is a consequence of a government that is unable to do its job. What needs to happen is the financial authorities and the security authorities need to work together. But there is no comprehensive plan for that. So the grey listing is likely, and we've got to make sure that we get off that as quickly as possible. And we want to hear from the minister what he's going to be doing about that. Yeah. Also, cutting wasteful spending because the debt levels are too high. Interest is already crowding out service delivery. So what we want the minister to be telling us is how he's going to cut back on debt. And the only way to do that is to cut back on wasteful spending. Take away the 8 billion rand that's being spent on ministries, entertainment. Take away the 5 billion rand on VIP protection. And then also focus on corruption and inefficiency. We could save between 15 and 18 billion rand a year. And that would create space then for more relief for people who are battling. We believe in the short run that there should be incentives up to 100,000 rand for solar panels and inverters so that individuals can actually get on with their lives even though the lights are off.
Yeah, and you also speak quite importantly about job creation. Yes. And there being a plan to cut unemployment by half by the year 2030. How would the DA approach this? What would that plan look like?
The DA's fundamental view is that you need to have an enterprising economy. And an enterprising economy means that you enable people to operate in that economy. So specifically, if you look at the size of the small business sector in South Africa, 60% of employment is actually coming out of the small business sector. So what you want to do is to incentivize small business to be able to flourish. So for example, on startups, entrepreneurs, give tax relief, etc., because we do in fact have an entrepreneurial population. If you look, for example, in the former township areas, there's massive informal economy that's going on there. So what we need to do is encourage that to happen, because big business is not able, obviously they've got a very important role to play, but they're not able to create mass employment. Government is not able to create mass employment. It's the small business sector. So if you remove regulations, you remove red tape, you give tax incentives, then you encourage that kind of activity. And what is South Africa's competitive advantage is the fact that we've got a young population. Yep. So what we need to do is educate our population and then teach them and encourage them to be entrepreneurial, because there has to be that spirit, because that's the only way. If you look at the rest of Africa, it's entrepreneurial. Here you have a government that dampens that kills that spirit. We must do the opposite. And that's the DA's view in terms of the enterprising economy, an open economy rather than a closed one, a government that facilitates rather than dictates. So for example, a government that would provide infrastructure. We are quite happy to have borrowing for infrastructure, so you can build roads and ports and airports so that people have got an infrastructure to work on and transportation. That's the role of government. It's not there to pick winners and losers and try to run dysfunctional state-owned enterprises that will never ever bring the growth. In fact, they just drain money from the economy because they are crony patronage networks. So we would get rid of the state-owned enterprises, we would inject the private sector in there, and in fact we have found a model that was used in Ukraine of how to actually sell state assets efficiently and not create, like they did in Russia, the oligarchs from selling the state-owned enterprises, is you can actually auction them off. And it can be efficient. And that's the model for South Africa, an enterprising economy where people are empowered to get on with it. And also, crucially, to have the life that they want to live. Because living in a country where you can't even boil a kettle when you feel like a cup of coffee, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, we are currently in an indefinite stage 6 of those power cuts, Dion. I just wanted to get your sense of how complicated would it be for government to implement what you're talking about, because we've seen that there has been a mesh between the state and the political party. That separation doesn't exist. So the political will to carry out these simple measures you've actually just broken down for us cannot happen as long as the state is intertwined with the political party. How does that change?
Absolutely, that is exactly the problem. You've got government intertwined and it's not working. It's actually very simple. You can change the government and get another one. And for example, a DA government doesn't have that model. So that's the one fairly simple solution. The other solution is to actually change the law and get regulations to make sure, for example, on cadre deployment, the DA is in court at the moment. Why? Is because cadre deployment has been the fundamental reason why Eskom is in the mess that it is, and the rest of the public sector is in the mess, because you've got politically appointed people who are not capable of doing the job. The DA believes you must go on merit, so pick the best person for the job, irrespective of the color of their skin or any other irrelevant thing. That's the DA's view. So what you need to do is say, what do you need to put on this thing to make it work? That's what you have to do. But in the absence of that, we have to shut down those state-owned enterprises. It's certainly not at state of, well, we have to start all over again. We've got enormous potential in South Africa. We are not a poor country. We are actually a rich country. We're only in this economic mess is because the wrong policies have been chosen. And that's the thing. And that's why I keep saying to government, just do one thing. Just do one thing in the right direction, because that will then help local sentiment and it will help international sentiment. So it is actually quite easy to do, because you just have to change the regulation to get government out of the way and do its job of the basics: education, healthcare, safety, infrastructure. And then let the private enterprise do it, because that's what they do best.
Yeah, very interesting insights as always. Dion George there, the DA Shadow Minister for Finance, saying to government, just do one thing and it will create a positive ripple effect to all the positive changes that need to be made in South Africa. We are in a desperate state, and unless the state of affairs changes, the livelihoods of many people in Mfundo will continue to suffer, maybe even get worse.